Naive, totally.
Before I left, 35 minutes, okay, then I got the card.
No, lies, it's all lies. I used to live in Kirkland, and I lived in Bellevue, so I know 4051 and 520 interchange.
I worked in Redmond
Did you?
for years. I know.
And I worked up, I had to travel up and down that, and I
Yes.
just gave up.
Morning and evening.
Yeah, no, yeah, yeah.
Maybe after 7:30. That's when I'd come home.
I don't know if we're quite live yet.
Okay.
Well, that's my notes. Because then I carry both, and it's so annoying.
We're ready to go? Good evening. It is 5:31, and I'm going to call the special meeting to order. And welcome to everybody who's watching from afar. This is a special meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in the public to comply with the Open Public Meeting Act. The purpose of tonight's special meeting is a work session to review and discuss the board protocol guidelines with WASDA workshop facilitator, Ms. Sandy Hayes. Ms. Hayes has been a WASDA member since first being elected to the North Shore District Board of Directors in 2009. During her tenure on the North Shore Board, she has been a legislative representative for many years, and most recently the board chair. She has also served on the WASDA Legislative Committee, currently in the role as vice chair. In addition to her school board work, Sandy has served on many nonprofit boards in her community, mostly focused on education. In addition, Sandy is an attorney specializing in restorative justice. She has been a partner of Heart Justice since inception in 2016. Both roles match her passion for increasing civility in our public discourse and a core belief that education is the great equalizer. Prior to her work with Heart Justice, she ran a small company working with young adults. She received both her undergraduate and law degree from the University of Washington. All right, so we're now on to 2.0, review and discussion, and I'm going to ask Ms. Hayes to begin the board protocol guidelines discussion. Ms. Hayes.
Way more than I normally share, so yeah, now you know. I've got minutes to know about it. Yeah, so I just want to, I've been doing this work since 2009. I passionately believe in our work and what we do and how important it is for our students. And I even signed up to do it again last fall, knowing what I was getting into. So I just am so grateful that you're really happy here today. I am going to just talk to you and anyone listening. It talks about board operating protocol. We're going to do the work to get to the place of being able to have a conversation about board operating protocols. I don't think this board is there yet. So just don't be disappointed if we don't get into that. We're going to lay the groundwork so that we can get there. And I see you have some articles that I suggest that you read before tonight. I recognize everyone's busy, and so if you've read them, fantastic.
Yeah, it's making weird noises. I think one of them is making weird noises.
Like little clicking things, right?
It's one of the ones back here, I think. Oh,
That was it.
oh, it was that.
What is that one?
Well,
Good job.
I'm not important, so we don't use super mic. Anyway, the articles, I hope that you had a chance to read them. They're going to ground us in our work. If you didn't, I highly encourage, particularly number 3, but that you take time to read that after tonight. The core message to those articles and why I share them with all the boards I work with is they point to the evidence that when we work together, we don't have to agree, but when we work together as a board, students' outcomes improve. So, what I want to start with, because now you know everything there is to know about me. I don't know anything about you. But what I'd like to start with is, I'm gonna start with you, Wally.
Okay.
And you're gonna share your why.
Why?
How long you've been on the Kent School Board and why you wanted this position.
I am brand new. Just got elected November of last year. Why? Because 4 of my children have gone through this district. I've always been someone that wanted to make sure that I do my profession, being an engineer, and typical immigrant, keep your nose down, work hard, don't make a fuss. But in 2016 November, I realized as a black man and as a Muslim, I could lose everything that I could. So therefore, I decided to serve the community and make sure that I am part of the solution. And I realize where the challenges are in our community, especially Kent. And that's why I decided to make sure that I am at the table to speak for those who are, like me, working very hard, keeping their nose down, and never even know where the district office is, and that I can speak for them through experience I have had and the challenges I have had, so that I can make their lives easier than mine. So that's why I'm sitting here.
Thank you. Tim, how long have you been on the Kent Board, and what brought you to this work?
So I'm now in my 5th year, but not with these people. So,
Thanks. That sounds really
These
I'm hurt.
people?
I'm hurt.
people laughed. So I got elected back. I think I'm guessing it's 2013 to 2018 in there. And I started my career in Bremerton, and then they double-filled a levy, and I got pig-slipped, and then I went to Edmonds, and then they double-filled a levy, and I found myself in 4 different schools in 4 years, and realized when I was coaching the kids I coached last year, it wasn't really working well. So I came to Kent, finishing my career at Kent Ridge, but took a 2-year timeout to be the KEA president. And then I went off to the community college, and I had 28 years in the classroom in K through 12, and then I got 10 in the community college system between Green River and Highline. And then I had, so there's overlaps because they're all part-time jobs. And, I ran I was here for 4 years, then I ran for mayor and lost, and so I was free for 4 months, and then I got a phone call, and they wanted to recruit somebody to serve on the Green River College Board of Trustees, not mentioning that they were on the way for a faculty strike, of course. And so in that brief turnover of a president of the college, I got another education, and I didn't renew, and was taking care of grandkids. But of course, I'd spent so much time with the Kent School District, and obviously having been on the board, the history and the players. And and arrived at the conclusion that the superintendent was not healthy for the district. And so I filed for office to reclaim my old seat as it was vacant in May, and in June he left, thereby undercutting a major goal right out of the box. But I have since, in being re-injected into this district, not surprisingly, the bulk of my friends are educators, and so of course I'm in contact with people that have retired and people that are still working in the district and whatnot. And it's been my professional life, so I just want to see the system work, that's all.
Michelle, how long have you been with?
I was elected in 2019, and prior to that, I was an advocate in the district. I'm passionate about all the jobs, policy, budget oversight, all those responsibilities that law outlines. And I didn't see that happening, and kind of to Director Clark's point, the superintendent and the board, I didn't think were working together or following law, policy, anything like that. And so honestly took the district to court, and the judge basically said you should run for board because being on the board is a way to get those things to happen, because that is part of the board's role, is oversight, policy, budget, things like that. My own children will tell you I've kind of ignored what they've done. My daughter, meanwhile, has graduated since then, and my son's a senior. But for me, it's more about kind of those places where policy and budget are not supporting students, and that focus on that big picture policy work piece of it. And then once the policy happens, to make sure we're enforcing the policy and doing all those things we need to do. Accountability is huge, personal growth, things like that. And actually, to this whole session, I'm really excited tonight because in 2019, I went to a WASDA session about this very topic, and saw all the data and research. It was a Sunday morning, hardly anyone was in there. Did you go to that session?
I think I did.
Yeah, hardly anyone was in there. But it was very fascinating to talk about, policy governance and how, I see the results from our survey and things like that, how that informs the work, and, sticking to our board roles of governance and things like that, and including the community. That was the biggest takeaway I had, is that including the community at every step of the way is what made the best districts. And I kind of don't feel like we do a great job of that right now. When I even first started advocating, we had regular town halls, and of course COVID has gone in and out, but so this is exciting. So I'm excited today.
Joe, how long have you been on the board?
So I was appointed in February of 2001 to an open position that I applied for and was selected, so that was very exciting.
I'm sorry, did you say February 2001?
Yes. So last February,
21.
2021.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, 2001 is a long time ago.
Yeah.
All right, 2021. Thank you. That
Yeah,
helps.
and then I was elected in November. My why hasn't really changed since my interview. I am an advocate for students and educators. I'm a teacher myself. I always advocate for students and educators. I think it's really important. As a teacher, a current teacher, I always feel like I have a unique insight on what's going on. I think a lot of times, if you're not regularly in the classroom, I think that a lot of what people see is kind of like a dog and pony show. And so I feel like I have unique knowledge about what actually is going on. And so going in, I'm definitely an advocate for students always and educators. I too came from a family of immigrants. English was my second language. And I think about I always say to people I talk to, everything that made my family successful and what we do in our everyday lives came from public school. So like learning English, ELL services, special education services, AP, honors, like all that stuff, sports, clubs, drama, I was in yearbook, all 4 years, like all that stuff came because of school. And a lot of the skills I developed as an adult, of course, came from my time at a public school. And so I'm always gonna advocate for public schools. I'm always gonna advocate for students having access and to things that they need, and advocate for making sure that we communicate and hear from students and communicate with the community and figure out what innovative ways to communicate with families that don't have English as their first language. And also I feel like a lot of times, as a person who's a queer person, a gay person, I feel like that there's a lot of LGBT issues that are kind of usually left unsaid at board meetings, and I feel like I constantly kind of pushing that a little bit, and mostly just because I don't think it's necessarily people don't care, I think people forget. And so unless you're a person in the community, I think it's important to kind of bring the voices of people who are not represented usually, so that we can include everyone. I always talk about mirrors and windows when we talk about curriculum and our students, where like whatever we do in the schools should be a window where students can see everyone in the community in the window, but they also should be able to look in the mirror and see themselves. I'm always gonna be an advocate for windows and mirrors when it comes to curriculum, books, etc. So for me, I always wanna make sure that all of our students have access to great, free public education so that everyone can do what they want after high school. That's kind of my why.
Well, I retired from my professional career, which was in writing, communication, and marketing. I was poli-sci major for a few years, and my dad said, Leslie, you need to get a job. I'm not sending you to law school. So I switched my major to communications, and after that I worked for many, many years, 32 years professionally. And so I retired. I was able to retire, and I stayed a little longer to put my last child through her master's degree in education. So of course I had time, and I tend to, as my daughter says, overdo, take on too much, and don't give her enough attention, or my other children enough attention in their eyes. But I felt I had a life. So I've done a lot of things, in the last 30 years, lived in this community, and I love working in this community. I believe in this community. And I think if I centered on one role that I really like and identify with, is mother and grandmother, and of course that involves children. And because of a lot of the work that I've done in advocacy in this community, I've been in PTAs in 3 different districts, held office, done all that, enjoyed all that. And then I volunteered in the schools, and ever since I attended the University of Washington, I have tutored. I started at TT Minor, an elementary school there, when I lived there years ago, and just kept doing that. Even while I was working, I tutored and mentored in 5 different districts, because I believe if there's any hope for this nation, it's in our children. I received a very good public education from very rural schools, and my children all have graduated, and most of them have master's degrees. 2 of them do, 1 of them doesn't. He's making more than the 2 that have master's degrees, by the way, because he's in computers. But they've also, thrived, and I think if there's this has become really important to me, and I saw this when Congressman Adam Smith and I were talking on the phone on another issue, but he said something that really rang true with me, that if we're going to have equity and we're going to have a nation that's educated, we have to keep and maintain public education. I've seen the erosion. And so because I have the privilege of being able to do this, I can do this at full-time work. I honestly believe it is full-time work right now if you're going to do the job right. And so my why would be, I want not only the children that have advocates and our parents that are at the table. Because of a lot of the other work I've done, I want the people that are not at the table, who are marginalized, who have issues, to come to the table. And I probably naively thought I'd be good at that. This has been a challenge, even though I've worked many years and volunteered on many boards. This has been very interesting, and this is going into my 3rd year on the board. So I'm anxious to learn and grow. As I said, I love this community, and this community has people that have stepped up in this pandemic that it's been unbelievable. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. And Fisher, you are part of this conversation too.
Absolutely, no, I just was listing some of the whys. I've heard some of the similar things to my why around language and that. So a little bit more about me is 36 years in this business. This is 36 years. When I didn't even know what college was about. I'm a first generation college student, college graduate, and you know, to this date, I'm still a proponent of supporting our most underserved, under-resourced students and families, and that is, Vice President Beno mentioned, we have over 130 languages spoken in this district, one of the most diverse districts, if not in the state, in the country, I believe. And so that's who I was, that student. And so I had a coach that was with me early on in my, I think I was probably second or third grade, finally playing organized sports, because I didn't get to play organized sports because I was traveling back and forth from South Texas to Moses Lake, Washington to work in the sugar beet fields. And I remember going to a gas station and signing up for Little League Baseball. And I thought it's the coolest thing that you could do, you know. And I said, wow, you can do this. But my dad said, as long as it's after work, you know, you're fine playing. I'm like, okay. But I remember this coach said, you know, as I would leave and come back each summer, he would say, you know, you can probably go on and play baseball in college. And I thought, what's college? You can play baseball? I thought that was the greatest thing ever. And so during that time, I then learned I wanted to give back, particularly for those same kids. And so I've been doing that ever since. Going back into the strawberry fields in Mount Vernon, where there's migration that happens there, and families still doing the things that I was doing when I was younger. And I've had the opportunity to go and read to them and talk to them about, you know, what college is, so that they know what college is about. And so I've devoted my life to that for 36 years in Texas. So that's a little bit of my why.
Sorry, I asked the question, but I hope that you all were listening to each other, because what I heard was a lot of commonality as to why you're sitting here. I heard all of you talk about a passion for making sure all voices can be at the table and that all kids are being served. I heard a passion for public education, which is fantastic, and a passion for this work. And so I want you all to hear that, so that as things get tough, those couple years have had their moments for sure, that you can remember, but we're all here because we care about our students. We want them to be their best selves, and we want to make sure that all of them have that opportunity, and we all feel that way, and we can get there through this work. So now you're going to indulge me. We're going to get out of our comfort zone, because doing this work, you got to get out of your comfort zone. So, Courtney back there is having a hard time. Not to worry. So we're going to do an exercise. There are almost no rules to the exercise. But what's going to happen? No, it gets better, doesn't it?
Because the bag is here.
The bag is
Yeah.
here, yes.
That's
So
true
I'm going to
exercise.
start with Tim this time, and Tim's going to come up, and you can do whatever you want, as long as it's legal, with what's in the bag. Hold on, not yet. And then when you're done, you're going to sit down, and then Michelle's going to come up, whatever. And then when you're done, you'll sit down, Joseph, and Leslie, Israel, back to Wally. Then after Wally sits down, Tim, if you're still wanting, you can get up and continue, and we'll just keep going around until everybody's done. If, Tim, you're You're like, nope, I'm good, I did my one time. Then you're just, do a pass.
Okay.
And then I thought, we'll keep going, and as long as you want to keep going, we will keep going. The only rule is there's no talking.
That's it.
That's it. That's it. Okay, go ahead, Tim.
Don't take my bridge down.
No talking.
Then any space left. Might be bigger.
Well, you know, Plato says you can learn more in an hour of play with somebody than in years of conversation. So I was like, I'm jazzed for this, you know? So, wow, that's a hot mic. So I was intent personally on just grabbing things and just making something out of whatever I grabbed, not particularly picking out. And I was very intent on not moving anything anyone else had put up, just working within that framework. And that was just my own thing. And then, so it's interesting to see that how other people went, oh, I think I can make this better, or putting I see all the dinosaurs, I think, made it all together on their little pond, except for that one up there, and things like that. So, yeah, it's fascinating.
Joe?
There were some things I didn't like, so I was like, I'll just knock it down. But I know there was no rules. But I also was debating, I wrote this down, I was like, but I don't want to do that because I don't want to disturb the work that my colleagues had done, even though I know this is just a game. But I think it's just, in a bigger picture, I feel like a lot of times that we don't want to mess up things that other people have done, but sometimes, you know, pushing the system, blowing it up, and restarting something or redoing something is okay. Like, it wouldn't have hurt anything if I would have done that. No one's feelings, I don't think, would have hurt. But I was thinking, I wrote that note down. I was like, but I'm always conscious of the hard work that everybody does, and like what I think is not necessarily like the most important thing. I also really liked all the dinosaurs and wanted to kind of do a little natural element, because I don't know. So to me, that's kind of what I was going through, what my brain was. But I understand that we're going to talk about communication. That's obviously the point of this. But like, it just, you know, I agree with Michelle as far as like watching people do things, you learn a lot. But I also think like, you know, a little bit of like, hey, what do you all want to build? Would have also gone, or a theme or something. But that's kind of what I was thinking. But I get the point of the exercise.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, this is going to be totally different, but I was thinking of my granddaughter, how she loves these little things, and all the fun we had. She loves animals. She's still little enough to get on the floor and play with that. So those are good memories that came to mind when I saw the little animals come out. And, you know, watching everybody participate is what we need. I was looking at it as more of a whole, that we were all participating and giving and designing how we wanted. And the reason at the end I just put things away is because I'm not afraid of change. And if what's been going on in our education system for years hasn't worked or isn't working, we should not be afraid to take down some of those things and do something different.
First, I thought we were trying to recreate Jurassic Park. Then more and more came out, like, not getting that, because that's the bus, and, you know, so I thought that was pretty cool. And then I was just trying to create, make this come alive, right? Whether, because it's 3D, and so when you have things you can manipulate, you can do that, because creativity is our own, right? So I'd go and I started creating like little sections or areas is why I put the parameter over here to have that be, and then I saw the dinosaurs all going over there. That still thought maybe we could still do Jurassic Park, but yeah, just love the creativity and just having the ability to be able to do that and not be judged by it, right? Because you gave us those parameters. So.
I mean, when I first saw the bag, I was like, we're getting gifts or what? But then it is metaphorically what life always brings us, which is a bag that we don't know what's coming out of, and we look into it, and whatever comes out, we make the best out of it. Tim said to me, "Don't break my bridge," so I try to stay away from that bridge. But it is pieces of life that we all are part of, and want to make sure that it all works together. and some of us, more detailed than the others. Some of us look the bigger picture and draw a picture of life. That's how.
It's pretty much the public school system in this state. 295 districts and a state legislature that can't quite get the concept of sustainability. So you have to play with the pieces you've got.
So does anybody want to add after hearing what others have said? Spark any new thoughts?
I just think it's interesting to see the perspective that we took on it, how people in this room, it really kind of says more about what we did and how we think. So I appreciate that.
Great. Yeah, so again, thank you. To Joe's point, there is no point, official point, right? It's, every district has made this their own exercise and kind of draw out different learnings from it. But there definitely is, part of the purpose is that exercise of communication twofold. One is to disrupt the power dynamic. I know from having done this that there are boardrooms that talk more than others, and so by removing the talking element, it puts everybody at the same space. And because it's nothing like anything anybody's ever done, then there's no sage that knows everything in the work. And then, yeah, if you can't communicate, how do you have a North Star? How do you know where you're headed if you don't have that opportunity? So there's lots of components to this. I actually was really embarrassed at one district. I thought, oh my God, that thing is just pathetic. I need to throw that away. And then they turned it into a whole thing, and one said, no, that's the special ed students. All right, it stays. So, yeah, every district's done something different. I did have one where I had to stop them after 45 minutes.
So they kept going.
Yes, they were very, very intent on having it their way. But keep this in mind, that you guys actually work really well together and are respectful of each other. And so remember that. Maybe that's, you just have to get some toys out or have a we're not going to talk moment and get back to that. All right, here we go. Now we got to do linear thinking work.
Yes.
Yeah. So you have also set new records in the state for all board members finishing the self-assessment in a record amount of time. So kudos to you guys. Mary Poppins bag. Right. There we go. So what I want you to do first is just quietly on your own go through this self-assessment survey, and obviously we're looking at 2022, but you can see it's got in the first couple pages comparative, or actually alphabet comparative over the years that this has been done. But we're looking really at this year, and so as you go through, just spend some time. What are some things? So the first, and just to ground you in what you're looking at, the first page, so there are 5 standards in this work. The first page condenses the standards, so a number of the questions, per standard, so it kind of compiles those all. So that's what the first page is compiling of each of the standards, and then as you dive into it, it's each individual question and how you rate it. So, and again, green means that you felt that you always did this. Green, in this case, is good. That's a good thing that these questions are written in a way where always is a good thing. Blue, most of the time yellow, some of the time red is never, black is don't know. So just go through this, maybe mark a couple, that concern you, a couple that you feel good about, and then a couple that you just have some questions on. So just take a few minutes to do that. I will continue putting choice
just to do that first page or through the whole document?
Just kind of flip through the whole thing. It's not a real thing. when the draft came back, it would be gone. And I, well, wait, where, because we're so focused on what didn't go well. So we have to start with the things that are going well, so you don't get rid of those when you're tossing everything out to fix things. So, what are some things that, you, as you look through that, you thought, that sounds pretty good, right? That reflects some good work that we've been doing here.
I liked,
Yeah, let's just start by shining out numbers, and then we'll come back to items.
47.
Mhm.
I like that one. I thought that was good. I liked 51.
Mhm. I like those two. Those were good to me. Yeah, did anyone pick up on any others? The good news is these are really good ones.
I mean, I liked how 64 looks, but I didn't agree with it, but that's a whole other discussion.
Right.
I like how it looks, like it looks good, but I don't agree with it, but that's a.
Okay. All right, well, we can put a star by that.
Uh-huh. It's, I mean, it's good.
I mean, when I looked the first one, I try to compare
Mm-hmm.
how we compared the past years. And standard 5, engage local community and represent the value and expectation. I mean, we were tied with 2017, so
Yes.
that tells you how we feel about the community engagement.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, let's start by just taking a look. We're actually gonna, we're gonna look at 64 because I think there's some things to glean from that. But first, we're gonna look at 47 and just, one, because again, we want to make sure that we don't stop doing this good work. And so this is keeping the community informed about the district's financial status, that there was a general feeling that that was good work that was happening here, and I know that that's been progress over the last few years. So we want to make sure that we keep doing that, and obviously it can always be improved on, but don't stop as we move forward, right? So that's great, and then likewise 51 was similar. Regularly monitor the budget and fiscal status of the district, and that's again, that's a huge part of the work as a board member. And so that's great that you not only are doing it, but you all recognize that that's key work and that you're, that you feel good about the direction that that work is going. Yes?
Can I?
Of
Is it
course.
okay?
Yes, this is your conversation.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, I interrupt you.
And those are two areas that in the past, our community has really said, that's been an issue. So that to me is not only good from our standpoint, from the district we represent. And that's a huge change.
Yeah, yeah. So kudos, and let's take a little moment to, okay, there's some things going well. All is not lost, because right now, there are some districts that are in a world of hurt budget-wise. I'm pretty stressed out. There's one actually just passed a levy and then is having a turn on community, that levy we just passed. Yeah, all those things we told you you were paying for with that levy, we have to cut them. So that's not a pretty situation for them. So, yeah, okay. Let's talk about 64 for just a minute because, well, yeah, let's just talk about, so, Joe, I heard you say that you didn't agree, and again, we want to keep this as a filter that this is the board modeling this, and not community district as a whole. So tell me a little little bit more about your thoughts.
I mean, the only 4 board members filled that question out, so I'm curious.
It's kind of annoying, and sometimes
Yeah.
it can be it's towards the end and people just
Yep.
miss it.
Miss it, yeah. I don't know, I feel like we could do a lot more. So I don't know if we necessarily model, like as a board, I think that's my thought. Like, I don't know if we necessarily model that understanding and sensitivity always. And so I think that's always something we can improve. So that's why, I just want to put, like, cause it look, the numbers look good, I just don't necessarily think we always do that. And so I'm I guess I'm very surprised that we had a lot of green and blue. Cause I don't necessarily, I feel like we have a lot of work to do on that.
Okay. And that is fair. I have heard, just as I have been here, a common agreement that that is a goal, which is huge.
Yeah.
And yes, there is always work to be done in this area, and so that certainly can be something as you go forward. Are there trainings that you can attend? Are there book readings you can do? How can we continue to improve in this area? But I'm kind of looking, as I've heard you speak, that there's a commonality that this is important work and that this is work that you're all striving to do. So to me, it's a plus. Giving another board goal of the state. So.
And I agree, that's why I
Yeah.
said, I like how it looks,
Yes. Yeah, no, and that definitely, that can be, when we eventually get to board goals, that can be part of that conversation of
Yeah.
how can we continue to work on that area.
Just a follow-up to that, if I may, when I read that, model cultural, racial, and ethnic understanding and sensitivity, I thought about, so this is us as a board, right? And I think about those of us who are people of color out there or here, and, you know, what that modeling, what they feel, right? So I just had a question about that when I read it and said, okay, I may think I do that, and that's me telling myself, and that kind of like, I think, Joe, you mentioned, this looks good,
Yeah.
but, so how else can we do, what other input can we give besides our, this is a good start, but I always think about that. You know, when you said, all right, community, because that looked good too, who is community? And if we think about, you know, those, and I mentioned earlier, the most diverse communities, so how do we know how they feel, right? Are we modeling it? Because it would be interesting, just kind of piggyback to what Joe's thought is, this is good, but how could we get better at that?
I think as a board, not as a negative, but I think we do a lot of check-witty, where we check a box, like, we do it. But what more? I agree, like, what more? And like, who's not represented? How do we hear them? I think to me, that's really important. I feel like we all said something similar to that today. It's like, how do we get people here who are not usually here? Like, there's certain families we hear from all the time, and there's just certain families who are hidden and we don't even know they exist, and
Right.
that's not okay either. So, like, we want to hear from the parents. Great, thank you for contacting us. I love getting emails from people regularly. And also, like, I want the families who don't necessarily know English to still get a hold of me, and then I can figure out what they're saying or translate or something. But I want everyone to feel like they can get a hold. But this looks good.
Great. And trust me, the communication conversation will happen this evening.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So what I wanted to now is just transition for a second, and I want to talk about some of the ones where there were a number of do not know answers. And I always tell boards, do not know is not a negative. Just you're new or you just don't know. And so there's a couple I wrote down that had more than one person. And this is to me, this is a signal to the board president, but certainly all board members of, okay, how do we make sure, and the superintendent, how do we make sure that everybody has this key information? So we're gonna look at those, because those are, I hate the phrase low-hanging fruit, but those are low-hanging fruit, because 8 carry out annual assessments of its performance. Yay, check. No. So that one had 3 people, and yeah, that's, unlike the superintendent evaluation, there is no legal requirement to assess yourself on an annual basis, but it is necessary practice. And so that is something that can get built into the tradition, and you guys have done a nice job. Obviously, we won't kill the pandemic year there, but that has been a practice in this district for a number of years, clearly, since it goes back to 2017,
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah, because we skipped 2021, so we did do it during the pandemic. So we could have done it last year and we didn't.
Yeah, and I have thoughts, but I'll put those later. And then 9, set goals for its improvement. That's very much tied in. That's what kind of follows on the board self-assessment is, okay, what do we as a board need to work on over the next year? So that matches that is connected. But it's important to just acknowledge that building that into your board calendar, then it doesn't get forgotten as new board members or new superintendents come in.
I don't even think we have a board calendar this year.
Okay, well, that's an excellent practice to just, we basically roll it over each year and tweak as the year goes on, but we have just set the second week, the second meeting in May is the superintendent evaluation. We do a retreat at the end of January and the end of March. We do facilities in the spring, we do technology in the fall, right? And so we
Right.
have that calendar all set up, and then it just rolls over, and then if life happens, it sometimes gets tweaks, but then those things are set into the calendar and they're.
Well, I think, my first year on the board, I did set that with our vice president, who had more knowledge than I did. But it was more or less set by the district, and we could just plug in, and that's what I kind of thought, because again, and it's no fault on anybody, but at that particular time, I don't think coming into the board, we had very much training. We were just kind of thrown out there and, figure it out on your own. And trying to get that training or ask questions was difficult. And so, yeah, I think we did do that kind of stuff, but then again, trying to do it the next year, and then it kind of fell apart. And now this year, because of so many things, with superintendent change at the I hear you.
Yeah, it's been a learning for me as I've done this work around the state, that districts that, one, it's an excellent communication to your community, right? So they then know, they will be discussing the budget at the second June meeting, or, right, that they know that it will get covered during the course of the year if they have a concern about the gutter at a certain school, or the play fields, the type of lighting, right? I know, I hear all the same things. There's a facilities scheduled conversation in March or whatever. So it's really helpful to the community, but it also, over the last couple of years, in times of crisis, when you have that consistency that you can demonstrate to the community, yep, we're still doing our work, we still have to educate the kids, then you fold in the crisis work along with it. And the districts that showed their community, yes, we are still doing the work over the last 2 years, wrote it out better. And then ones that look like, oh my God, there's a pandemic, that's all we can focus on. And yet we know the work still happened, right? The buildings are still lovely, they're still here, your budget is great, all this work still happened. But if the community's not seeing it, it's harder for them to.
But Sandy, I don't think that was ever clearly brought up since I've been on the board. How pretty much felt the district was in charge of that. Now, are you saying the board is also in charge of getting that information out to the community? How is, if there's a whole year's calendar formulated, as long as I've been in this district and gone to meetings and stuff, I don't recall of ever seeing what we're gonna do all year long. I mean, maybe it was, the board knew, or maybe there was an understanding, but and I'm pretty savvy as a community member, I mean, I thought I was anyway, but I don't recall anything like that being public, so how do you really do that?
Yeah, it's a practice that you get into, and initially you would start with the board president and superintendent and just sitting down and saying, okay, what are all the topics that we want to make sure get covered? And certainly the whole board can weigh in, you know, we want to make sure there's a session on X, Y, and Z. And then you plot it out over the years, and well, June's not a great time to really have a 2-hour session on anything, because I can see all your high schools. I know you've got a lot of graduation ceremonies coming up that are taking your time, right? So that, you know, those are the kind of conversations you have back and forth, but then you just schedule it out, and then it goes into the, Lee's back here, and your admin assistants, it just goes into their database, and then in July or early August, they just do a rough estimate. Here's when your meetings are. We just plugged it in based on what you did last year, and then you.
How do you advertise that to your community, though?
That's a good point. So I think that might be on our website, like under the school board, but it doesn't change.
I feel like it's a common, like in my union work and then my nonprofit work, we literally, at our summer retreat, because in the union and in my nonprofit, in the summer we have a retreat, we literally look at our calendar from last year and we're like, okay, so our union work, the state conference is always this month, the national conference is always this month, the president evaluation is here, we have these trainings here, like it's literally, we just roll over, it just happens to be a different year. Same with nonprofit. September is always back to school, October is always this, November is this, January is no name calling week, day of silence is, like, we have the same calendar, because regardless of what happens, I was actually surprised we don't have that public, we just put it on our website. Here's when this stuff will happen. I was actually surprised we don't have that, because in my other lives, that's what we do, and at our retreat, we always look at the calendar, just roll things over. Like, to me, it was easy, like, oh, that should be just a common practice, I think.
My first year on the board, probably in about January or February, we sat down with an Excel spreadsheet and had a work session. And to President Hamada's point, it was basically, this is all the stuff, and here's a few places where if you have interest in something, you can throw it in there. And then that never happened again. But there's there's things like our race and equity policy is supposed to be updated every April. And I mean, it's like things like that should be on our calendar, and it wasn't updated.
Right.
And so there's a lot of things, like we're supposed to have a board director. We're supposed to have a student board director that we have, like there's a schedule in the policy that if it was on the calendar and it rolled over, then, but it's just not been a practice. And I mean, and we weren't onboarded. And so hopefully you two were onboarded because
How about Joe? He's
Yeah.
always forgotten.
yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah.
walk in,
Because I was
right?
appointed, so
Yeah,
I came
but-
later.
But you know what I mean, so.
I think
never
that would
mind.
be extremely helpful, because honestly, I'm gonna say this, that I didn't think that fell under the board to do, because the way it was presented to me, the district took care of it, and when they called on us to plug in, it was very minuscule, so.
Isn't these our meetings though? Like, it's,
Right.
like we meet, but we do it in public so the public can see us work, but it's our meeting. So it should be our calendar. And obviously staff and whoever can help us with, this is what it should be, what you're missing, this is what you need to do.
But it should be out to the community. I've never seen, I mean, unless I'm dumb, deaf, and stupid, which could be.
No,
It's not
let
there.
me pull back a bit. So we as the board get our calendar, starting in August 1st through July 31st, and every event and whatever, and it does say, we will be covering facilities or technology or whatever in this meeting. community, but we know, and then if a community member says, hey, I've got issues, you can really buy those laptops.
Right.
We will be getting our yearly update on technology at the November 11th meeting. If you want to come, that's when we'll have that whole thing. And so then we can say that. And then if something happens, like we didn't do the smart balance this year, then the superintendent and board president are like, okay, well, maybe we won't be doing the smart balance report in October because we won't have the test scores.
Right.
We'll move it to a later date. And so you have to make sure you have that flexibility, but what you start with is kind of this template of a calendar that you just roll over year after year that has the racial inequity policy on your April meeting. And again, then it doesn't get forgotten, and then it's happening every year. And when communities call you, you go, wait, where's my calendar? Right, we are doing that in March.
And I think I went to a WASDA session about this. And because I've seen Everett had a calendar that was like, here's this, and this falls under this group, and it was all color coded. So, but I remember seeing it on a big screen. So I think it was like at a WASDA conference or something where I went to a session about calendaring, and at that point in time, Everett, I think it was Everett, that they had a color coded.
And in no way, and again, for community and for Leslie, nobody's done anything wrong. This is all this, we have a lot of new board members and a lot of new boards. This is all learning, and that's why I'm
No,
here.
I think that's very helpful. I mean, because again, I just was waiting for the district because that's the way I was taught or what I
Well,
fell
and once
into.
it's set, once the template's created.
And I
it
think
does
they
just
have
roll-
that.
rolls
I
over.
just never,
Yeah,
yeah, anyway, okay. That helps connect the dots is what I'm saying.
very good. All right. So, couple others in there was a number of do not know. This ties in. So 52 is follow a schedule for the timely review of the district plan. That actually connects
Yeah.
very much to that calendaring conversation.
Yeah.
That's on the calendar. We review the district plan on
True.
Wednesday, when everybody knows when that's happening.
And I answered never on this because I've never had a timely review, never had a review of the district plan in my entire time on the board, really. I mean, maybe pieces of it, but, and our strategic plan's ready for review, so that would be something before a new one gets started to,
And then, yeah, district plan is kind of an amorphous words for,
Right.
for us, for my district, it's our strategic
Yeah.
plan.
that's what I thought this meant, the strategic plan.
Yeah,
Because we've never reviewed the whole strategic plan, ever,
right.
in my time on the board.
And for, over here as a hard tech, you don't have to do it all in one sitting. You can
Yeah.
break it up into.
Yeah, and I think we have done that. It's just that we haven't, I mean, because I was on the strategic plan, the last one, I could see those segments coming out. They didn't come out, I mean, I think that's the thing. There's such a learning curve to this stuff that I'm
Yes,
beginning to put the pieces together, Sandy.
We call
But-
it drinking out of a fire hose.
And again, the pandemic threw a lot of stuff. Changing superintendents has changed, trying to find a new superintendent, it's been a lot.
So, I mean, I think the only thing from the strategic plan we've ever really measured or had a presentation on is graduation rate, right? And I mean, we used to have even like discipline data that came every quarter and things like that. And I think that's in the strategic plan, but that's all I remember ever.
Well, the SIP is part of it. Each school improvement plan is part of it. We had that on there. I mean, I served on this strategic plan, so I remembered parts of this, so.
So, all board members have a copy that we have with us on the dais when, at every board meeting, there's a strategic plan, and then we have many copies. Right, so that we have that, but, to that calendaring conversation, breaking it up into
Yeah,
segments.
that's the missing dot there, Sandy. I
And then
get
having
that.
reports, yes. Okay, Good. That's- All right, 56 and 57. Written goals for the superintendent that focus on specific outcomes for student learning. And then is that communicate performance expectations for the superintendent. When you are in transition, that is hard to do that. The law is that you do it by the end of May, right? So
And that's the evaluation.
the superintendent.
And we have
evaluation.
definitely had that.
And usually that's when you build the goals, is out of that superintendent evaluation. That naturally then comes of, okay, here's some goals for you over the next year. It can be tied to your strategic plan. There's ways to do it that it's not personality driven. That's something goal was, we want you to move into the district or whatever. But if there are ways to do it around, okay, we would like to see, the X happen with graduation rates or discipline data, or we'd like to get more information or whatever, but those can be goals that can be tied to the strategic plan. That's a nice way to make it an objective conversation rather than a subjective conversation. But that is something that happens every year at the end of May. With a superintendent that's not leaving, we're not doing it this year because our
Well,
superintendent's leaving.
we,
Yeah,
Mr. Bill and I have had that conversation, how we are gonna do something. It's not gonna be the exact same, but yeah. Because we can't avoid it,
If I may,
right?
we paused on the strategic plan piece, that was first. Doesn't mean that we don't have a current one, and so, yeah, there are things, there were strategic initiatives, which I call priority initiatives, and those are pieces I think that needed to continue, and they're split up by goal, which is aligned with the strategic plan, goals 1 through 4, and so, yeah.
okay, and you got to interrupt, but I believe I understand you're coming in as permanent, right?
Yes, that's
Okay,
right.
okay.
The
so-
contract is not officially signed.
Yeah.
All right, so that can be something that happens over the next month or two that you set aside, and it is a lengthy conversation, so you want to set aside a couple of hours, but having that in-depth conversation about, because there really isn't an evaluation component at this point, but goals and
yes.
work going forward, that you all get to be part of.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
And so it says communicate performance expectations for the superintendent to our community. And in my entire time on the board, I've only been through 2. And the first one was very personality driven, no measures and all, which I worked in HR for 12 years, and that goal setting and all that was a lot of my work, and it would just drove me nuts. Because there was nothing to like go, this is measurable. And then next year it was better, and there were more SMART goals. But I don't think, and the second year, I think we maybe put it out so the community could see what the goals were. So does this mean, like, does North Shore, you work in North Shore, do you have the goals, like annual goals on the website somewhere where the community can see them, or?
So we're a policy governance district.
Right.
And so our superintendent goals are our policies.
Okay.
And so we review, there's 13 of them, so we're reviewing one every board meeting, and then at the end of the year, we just compile them all together, and it's all public, and we just say, how did you do in each one of these goals? And so you're not policy governance, but you could, again, to keep, because I'm looking at 58, which is the other one that I flagged, and again, it's around the superintendent evaluation. Yes, I actually also stepped into this work where it was personality driven superintendent evaluations, and I thought, what are we doing here? This is making no sense. But you've got some goals, and so you can till you get to, you find an evaluation process that works, you can use those goals. And then as you're doing them in public at board meetings, then that's what you bring back when you do the evaluation. You say, okay, here's how you met the objectives, or here's where there's still work to do. And then it's all a public-facing document.
And too, Sandy, again, when I served on the last strategic plan, priority initiatives, we met for 5 months. And the goal of that was to have them updated every year, but we never followed through with that update. You know, the strategic plan would meet again and see how we did and if we want to change those. So we had a process, but it just was never followed through, you know, because of many things.
Yeah. Yeah, so.
And it wasn't the whole community, but, I mean, there were several people on that committee that were really dedicated to it. And the public could join that committee if they wanted to. And the discussions that were had night after night when we met for a long time were more valuable than anybody just getting up and making public testimony. So, yeah.
No, that's the thing with strategic plans, right? They're this amazing work that happens, and they become wall art, right? They're on the shelf, and then we never see them. It's how to, and this is an excellent opportunity to have the superintendent evaluation be an objective experience and bring that strategic plan and those priority initiatives off of the shelf and into the work of the district.
And then you said something about policy governance, because that's been a thing that I've been trying to research, because it just seems, when we talk about one of these that I think was kind of low about understanding the division of roles and responsibilities, it's like, it's just so clean in policy governance, things like that. So that's another conversation probably, but.
Yes, yes. Okay, so let's do, what I'm going to do, so I've got 2 more categories, and I know that we've got about a half hour left. So one category is what I call the rainbow ones, and those where everybody has a different answer to the question.
That's crazy, how many of those there were.
Right, and there's a lot of those, so I really want to make sure we have time with that. So I'm going to do, I have a couple where it was consensus that this was an area of concern. So that was, for me, what I saw was 18 and 22. If you saw any of it, again, there was a consensus that this was something that was concerning.
Yes, I flagged 18.
Okay.
And 22.
Everybody's thinking, like, what can I say?
Do you have little flags
I
you carry
do.
around with you?
I can't. I
I'm
come
the office
prepared.
supply store.
I'm so
Come
jealous.
prepared.
I'm so jealous.
Let me see my nose, like, I like being prepared.
Okay, let's talk about 22 first, because I think it's less of a Pandora's box that we're opening. So, and it's been brought up already, this concern about onboarding of new, I'm tired of that word, orientation of new board members and creating that new team. And I heard that pretty much all of you, because you are fairly new board. And again, that's creating a system. It's not something we have down in our district either, but putting together a process and creating space for board members to feel comfortable saying, oh, we put together an acronym handbook for new board members. That is, boy, does education love its acronyms.
Yes, I can tell you that.
Yes.
I was not part of education system,
No.
and
no.
I had to learn that quick.
Yes, yes. And I have, and maybe that is part of my privilege, but I just came on and I just was like, yeah, what is that? I didn't care if people thought I was an idiot or what this. What is that acronym stand for? I just got very comfortable with asking questions. Some poor person stood up at the first board meeting and was explaining something, and I was like, I'm sorry, and who are you? Oh, you're the head of human resources. Okay, that helps.
My friend Google
Mhm.
helped me a lot.
Yeah, but I will say, Wally, if you don't know,
Right.
guarantee 9
Other
out of
people-
10 people don't know
And
either.
from the
so-
tech world,
Mhm.
this is how we've always been trained,
Mhm.
is before you ask the question, do your own
Research.
research.
I
And that's what I was
Yeah, I
like.
get that,
that's,
but
you
I
know,
think it's
my
okay.
training has been like that always. So my brain is
If you're in a board meeting and they're talking about something that makes no sense
Yeah.
to you, and Joseph, you got a little bit of a leg up because you're in this world, but
Yeah.
still there are gonna be things.
absolutely
Ask the question.
right.
I'm sorry, what, and it does not mean you're not
Absolutely.
qualified or talented, or in fact, just ask those questions.
We do have a policy and a process for, or a procedure for orientation.
Yes.
We just never followed it, ever, as far as I can tell. I mean, I've heard it from board directors, several board directors ago, that we have a policy. That's kind of, it's like, some of our policies, if we're not gonna do them, I think we just need to dump them.
But part of it is also creating an environment.
Mhm.
That's something that I was gonna flag later on too, where there has to be an environment where people can feel like that we're able to do that. And I think that sometimes it's not. And so even when I first started, and I'm pretty proficient with parliamentary procedure, I'm my union parliamentarian. And I was told several times I was wrong, I didn't know, and I was like, oh, okay, so, like, screw my knowledge, like, it doesn't matter, like, what I know. So it was, there has to be, so, yeah, there could be policy and whatever, we can say, oh, feel free to ask a question. But if the environment isn't set for people to do that, it's not gonna happen, right?
Yeah.
And so it's creating that environment, and I know a couple of board meetings ago, Michelle talked about harassment, intimidation, and bullying, and that's been the historical in our district with administrators. And so, and even so looking at, and we always say we need to move forward, and I agree, but as someone who's restorative justice trained, it's just like, we still have to heal past harm. And so if people don't feel like they can ask questions, or like you get shut down, and so a lot of my first few months, I was like, okay, I'm gonna shut up because I don't know anything, because I'm the new guy. And so, like, there has to be, and no shade to any of my colleagues, and so, but there has to be, we have to set that precedent where we're able to do that. And then we can ask whatever. So I feel more comfortable doing that now. But we always have to make sure that that's there. Like, that we have to feel like that we can. And so we could say that all we want. I'm trying to find which one I flagged, where I said something, I don't remember, I'll find it, but there was something related to that, and I agreed, I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we can make a commitment that the next time someone says, I'm sorry, what is that? That someone else then on the board says, great question. I was wondering that myself, even if maybe you really weren't, but just providing that support and backup for, that this is important work for us to ask these questions and get that clarity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes to, a lot of times, asking questions isn't always seen as a positive, and it's, it falls into that, so yeah, that's
I
a
don't
good
know.
thing to say, yeah, because I mean, that's our job, board meetings are our job, it's our time to ask questions, and it's our time to make sure that, everything's going the way it should, so yeah, I agree that creating that safe space for anyone to ask questions.
I'm a new guy,
Yeah.
and I can tell you from my experience, every time I asked a question, I got an answer. When I first got it, I was actually onboarded. Naomi sat with me. Israel sat with me. Leslie, and I was able to ask the questions. And I know I've asked so many of them questions, but that was where I was coming from, right? That I had no idea. And it's been always the experience where I was able to ask a question and got an answer quickly. And so, I don't know, probably you guys have, previous, years experience, and I wasn't part of that. So for me, it's like, when you say, when that has, I'm always like, oh wow, was it that bad? So, because that's not what I'm experiencing, and I'm thankful for that.
Which is great.
Really, yeah, it really
Right.
is. It really makes, I'm so thankful for that.
That's
because
awesome.
It really is.
And that leads to like, I was gonna say, it was number 18, but that was the one you said it was gonna open Pandora's box, which I think we're kind of leaning towards.
Yes, so let's look at 18.
Okay.
Treat all individuals, including fellow board members, staff, students, and community members with respect. And I'm gonna call on Tim, because you've been very quiet, and I wanna make sure all voices are heard.
Yes.
And given the responses, I feel pretty safe that this wasn't that you have concerns here as well.
Yeah. My observation is the previous boards went through a dramatic upheaval. The one that I came in with, I was the rookie, and everybody else had been there, and they moved on. But they had,
This is before
yeah, before, this is back in 2013.
2013.
And they're, way back when, remember I taught in this district, so I mean, way back when, back in the 80s, if you can go back that far.
Hey, I taught in the 80s.
The school board was dominated by business types, and an unusual number of bankers.
Oh, wow.
And they had a superintendent, George Daniel, who actually he was an excellent superintendent from the standpoint that it was a growing community. He got the job because the previous guy had economically failed. And so he knew with the suburban growth, what you had to do was pass levies. And he knew that that meant that the people had to trust you. And he worked really hard at that. And so as a result, it was suburbia. They did have very high expectations. They took the recommendations from some real academic possessed people, and they built a wonderful suburban model. And it truly was one that people were excited to work in, be a part of, and the process of the product was absolutely stunning. The number of Ivy League students and military academies and Stanford and Cal Poly and the rest of it came out of these high schools, and everybody knew it. But inevitably, the growth eventually began to slow, and then suddenly there were two collisions that occurred. One of them was George retired, and suddenly, while they thought they had stability, they didn't. And all of a sudden, you ran through a string of temporary superintendents, and finally, the board went out on a national search and took someone that on paper looked good. But she proved to be, you cannot miss this. Just think of the effect. Someone who was violently anti-union, and I mean, the course was set. And it obviously didn't play out well. And then they started to run into other fiscal problems. The result was you had superintendents that were being hired that were being told, we have very high expectations. And they would have to come in and demonstrate their new plan was going to be the model that everybody else was going to envy. And oh, by the way, it sucked up all the available money. And when the next financial hit came, the house of cards came tumbling down. And the result is, dynamically, the district was going through a dramatic change as the student population makeup started to change. And grimly, of course, the growing value of homes in suburbia began to create a situation where we began to inherit the poor of Seattle. And they came in droves, and they came with needs, and that created a need to create another model to begin to cope with that. And now we're at the point, and remember, when I was teaching, you added an elementary a year. And now we don't add anything. And the student population are not running off to the Ivy League colleges at the rates that they used to. And the result has been the public measure was in fact student scores and graduation rates. And COVID, of course, just played complete havoc with that entire routine. And when we do finally snap it back into place, it's not going to look good. Now, we won't be alone because there's nobody around us that's going to be looking real good either. But it plays into that narrative of, if we do not keep the trust of the public, we have a serious problem on the near horizon. And so when I look at that question about respect, I'm afraid that the face that the board has put before the public has not been solid, and in fact has not always been. So the quest here obviously is going to be, how do we rebuild that trust? Because I hate to say it, but if we don't, the answer is fatal. So, yeah, I do have some issues about how we represent ourselves towards the public, because my experience on the board says whatever you do, you face the public and you say, we hear you, we see these issues, we'll show you the plan that we're using to address them, and if you'll trust us, we will get movement. But I'm not sure that exists now.
I would agree with that. I would agree. And even if, I guess with this question, even if like something happens, like I think it's up to our district or our superintendent to kind of address whatever occurred or whatever, like, oh, we know that there's a problem with inclusive education and virtual learning. we're gonna release a statement saying, here's what we're gonna, but we don't, I feel like we do a lot of, solving the problem when it comes forward instead of preventing problems from occurring. And so it's like, and even when something happens, it's being able to say, hey, this issue happened, we wanna make sure we resolve it. And I don't always think that happens. I think sometimes, I don't wanna say we hide things, because I don't think that's necessarily true either. But I don't think we always reveal everything. And so like, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without like calling a specific incident out. Like if there's an incident that happens in our school, where something happened to a student, we should then release a statement saying, hey, you know what, we don't condone, bullying of students, we don't condone racism, we don't condone, homophobia. Like, so like, we're gonna do this to make sure that staff get trained or students get trained so that people don't use homophobic slurs or racial slurs or whatever. I just feel like it just kind of sits. Like, it goes out and it sits. And so, and I think as far as like, I don't think that's always respectful. And so if we do something wrong, we need to be able to be like, hey, you know what, like this happened and we wanna make sure we correct it. And I think that makes community lose respect with us, but also I just wanna make sure we always do the right thing, even if something didn't happen. And I know that's, I always think of The Wiz and no bad news, right? Like, and it's like, I don't wanna hear no bad news. It's like, no, like, bad news happens, so we have to be able to do it. If you haven't seen The Wiz, watch it.
I totally get your reference.
Right. I hope you all get it, but if you haven't, but it's, the evil queen doesn't want to ever hear anything. She always wants to hear like the positives. She doesn't want her day ruined by bad news. And I think sometimes we follow that model where it's just like, if it's not good, we don't want to talk about it. So I think with that, and so I think sometimes when we try to bring up things or kind of figure out things, I think people think that maybe we are like throwing a wrench in something. It's just like, no, everything's great. It's like, no, it's not. It's not.
Can I give a little different take on that?
Of course, Tim, always.
So the problem here is our job is not to run a school.
Correct.
Our job is to bring the supports to deal with the issues based on the best intelligence we can get. But that intelligence is supposed to come through the superintendent because that's the operational side of the ship. And so it would be extremely dangerous to start to have the board to insert themselves into a particular problem that occurred, because that would imply that we're watching that building. And that's not our job.
Agreed, but and so my view is like, if someone says, hey, this homophobic incident happened or this racist incident happened at the school, I don't want to turn a blind eye and be like, oh, the superintendent needs to deal with that. I want to say, we don't condone racism. We don't condone homophobia. Like, and I think, to me, as a board, we can say that, but direct our employee to deal with it.
Okay, so we are now into the dangers of the digital age and the attempt to try and replace a standard media process by individually contacting members with concerns is going to embroil the board in discussions that will sap our energy but won't solve the problem.
I'm not necessarily talking about like individual, but like when people come to our meetings and tell us those things to the board, right?
And fine, we need to hear those messages, but the reason we don't respond is there can only be one response. That's the catch.
Well, and let me add, Tim, that I hear what you're saying, Joe. And I look at this at a little different lens, that in the 2.5 years I've served, I'm beginning to see that issues are not as cut and dry as when they're presented initially. And I really want to do my research and look into all that before I even start to formulate an opinion. And they're complex. They're a lot more complex than I think I realized when I started out with this. And I think our role as a board with our community is, yes, to identify when there's a serious problem or come out in general about equity or major issues. But I don't think individual issues, and speaking to them ongoingly, it's like Tim said, I think we could be inundated with just working on. We won't get to the real realm of it. And I think I've kind of changed a little of that as I've gone along. And I also think it's part of our duty, where there's a lot of parents out there that have not had the involvement that the people on this board have had with their community or with their schools, or they've come from other countries where they're not even allowed to go to the school. But I don't think I'd want, let's say I have a new little kindergartner coming into school, and I don't want some big thing coming out of the school. We're doing this wrong. I'd rather, excuse me, be a cheerleader. I may understand all these other issues that are going on and speak to them if it's risen to a certain occasion. But I don't want them to feel like, hey, you're turning your kids over to a screwed up system. I mean, I would feel terrible as a new mom or dad if I'd taken little Johnny to school for the first day and I didn't have some degree of confidence that my child was going to be safe and cared for. And I'm not saying we don't have issues here. And maybe I err on, my daughter tells me I'm very positive to a fault. But I mean, that's kind of the way I look at it. And I'm not ignoring these issues, believe me. I'm looking into everything I can find out and anything I can do or share with Superintendent Phillip. And he's been so much more open to communicating, talking. I mean, it's like night and day. I mean, I had to get our attorney, our board attorney at the time, to get our superintendent to call me back when I was board president. To me, that should never happen. So, that's just some of my thoughts. And I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong.
Well, and Michelle weigh in, and then I have some thoughts to
Okay.
bring up.
I tend to lean towards more what Vice President Benno was saying is, I think, again, I've done a lot of work in HR, and the gap, what I see gaps of trust is like, if you say, this is great, this is great, this is great, and what someone is experiencing is not great, the distrust gap is in the middle between but as board governance, policy oversight and things like that. So when we talk about policy governance, it's like, and my brain sees patterns. So I can say, I think I see patterns over and over. So it's like, right now, just as an example, in the nation, not withholding recess from kids is hitting all these places. You probably know in WASDA, we adopted a policy where you can't withhold recess from kids in February 2021. But then that's like, but people are saying, no, they're still withholding recess. So then I say, bigger picture, how are we training, principals so they know, so they can share it with the teachers, or how are we doing that? So if we just say, no, everything's great, and no kids are being withheld from recess, when I'm hearing it's not, right? It's not my job to address every single kid that might have been withheld from recess, but my bigger job is, here's the policy, and then how is it being handled, and things like that. So and that was a big thing with the last superintendent too, but I think it's a balance, it's a fine balance, and it's like, you can't, you're not, as board directors, we're not supposed to handle individual issues, we can't act independently anyway, but if we see a pattern of something that needs to be fixed and addressed, then I think that, the first thing to do is to just shoot an email, so it's not, maybe doesn't become a big thing, or something like that, but it's I think that's where that distrust gap happens, because one thing is being said, everything's great, and then the experience, and then there's that gap.
Again, I've got nothing but positive. I'm from a community that really doesn't understand the education system of the United States. So before I was sworn in, I was getting a call from a community saying, my daughter was going into the school and the teacher was looking at her funny. Things like that. So I have to educate them of what is the process of going through and getting that grievance resolved at a local level instead of, because for them, they see me, they know that I'm now on the board, so the very first thing is to pick up the phone because they know me. So it has been like that, and also educating them on how to be active advocate for their kids' education, because where they came from, they send this kid to school, the school system takes care of that kid. Their job is to make sure that kid is going to school, clean, fed, and when they come home, do their homework. So when I got on the board, I was, I'm still gonna go back to that. Maybe I see the glass half full, right? Instead of half empty. I've gotten, every time I asked a question, I've gotten a response. And in terms of, with the kid, communicating to the community, I saw Interim Superintendent Bella just send out every single incident that I didn't even know happened. For example, an accident happened. Within a few minutes, I'm getting an email Bella saying, this is the communication I'm going to send to the community. So the guy who is on the, not with Tim, who's been part of, previous board, I really was, I'm getting that information. Now, the thing I really wanted to focus on was this goal setting. And when I came on, I had great ideas, and then that environment of now that you can hear in this setting. So it's hard for me to now think big, because I'm thinking I have to put these fires out, and it's not to me, that is where I feel like it is been where we lacked to look to the community, where we know what we're doing. Because I hear that now, with the community telling me, hey, why are you guys not talking? Is there an issue? And they see the division. And so to set a goal, it's almost impossible, because we really have issues to work on. And that's where I feel that maybe a retreat and kind of let people, air their grievances. And I'm always, maybe it's, my long before I came to the United States, how I dealt with things after the United States. I don't look back. I'm always the type that looks forward. Because what I feel is I can't change the past, but I can change what's coming. And I have an opportunity to make it better. Maybe it's my immigrant ability to, just, not look back and just say, hey, now you're here, you got to do something with what you got. So I feel like that's where we're not, going towards. I feel like we're going backwards. So in order to go forward, maybe we have to go backward first. Maybe. So that's what I just want.
Okay,
first of all, I just want to say, Wally, what you just described is not localized to your community. It happens to all of us. The calling of board members, I make a joke, and I'm actually serious, but I say it jokingly that my district is large like yours, and I have days where I think I'm driving into Lake Washington because I need to get in and out of the grocery store today. I do not have time to stop at every aisle to address the individual issue. So that is a universal, and that is the balancing act of our work is being responsive to the community, but we got into this work because we wanted to do the really great, innovative, goal-setting, talking about education and what our students need to be ready for the second half of the 21st century, right? That's why we're here. Not to address the bullying incident or we had a tree fall in
Right.
the parking lot today. Right?
Exactly.
That is not. So how do we get to that place where the community trusts us, that there is a system set to handle, the tree will get removed, the lighting will get fixed, the gutter will get taken care of, the student issue will get resolved at the local level so that we then have the space to do that work.
Right.
And that's what I'm hearing is where you're at, is you know that's where you want to go. So you want to get out of this work. And so it's got two folds to it. One is, and you described it perfectly, is getting them back, having that conversation. That is awful if that just happened to your child. Have you brought it up with the teacher? That's your first step. And then, yes, I did or no, I didn't. Right. Okay. Then principal, administrators, and so forth, and making sure they understand the system. And then, if that isn't doing that, right? And here's the thing that is so beautiful about the community actually wants that to happen.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to come to you to get the issue resolved. I know, and we like to help. We wouldn't do this work for free if we weren't believing that we were helping, right? And so they actually want you to say, go back into the system, and that's how it will get resolved. And so that's the first, and then what you do is when it happens to me, I then get on the phone with the superintendent or send an email, hey, I just want to let you know, this concern has been raised to me, and so, let's monitor it, and then hopefully I hear back in a day or two, or however long, okay, this is what happened, and I'm like, okay, good, problems that not solved, because sometimes racism we haven't quite. If Superintendent Baylor could solve that, that would be awesome, but at least managed, mischief managed is how we put it. And that's the goal, is getting that trust, to your point, that trust in the system that they can go back locally so that they're not coming to the board meeting bringing up these individual issues. And so, so it's kind of twofold. And then maybe there's an explanation of some of these different things. And then I think, to your point, if there is in April, you're going to get a report on your racial and
Equity.
equity,
Yeah.
in our district, right,
Yeah.
and educational justice. But if you're going to get that report, then okay, here's how the system is dealing with this on a larger scale, and I can, when I get that stopped at the grocery store, and I'm just trying to get my milk, I can say, okay. Right?
No one's ever stopped.
Oh, seriously? Oh,
Oh my God.
Library, grocery store, Starbucks, it does not matter.
Yeah.
I was in an airport in Amsterdam, and I got stopped by paraeducator. She was like, really? It's 3 o'clock in the
Good morning.
I've got 3 kids, and I'm trying to get on another airplane. But, oh no, let's address your issue right now. Okay.
That's hysterical.
Yeah.
So that I think is, and that's work, right? That's, we're not gonna resolve that tonight, but that's work going forward, and it's a commitment on your part of, I need to understand what the process is. So, and being okay with saying, you know, let me check on what, how we're gonna, what your next steps need to be.
Right.
If you don't know, and so don't be afraid to ask, but, and then contacting superintendent, say, here's what, and because he needs to know if this is coming his direction, right? And if it's.
I'm
yeah,
sorry I didn't do that a couple of times.
It's okay.
We're not perfect.
It's a learning process, and the story I tell from my own district is that I had a parent call, and he was always a football coach, right? Upset with the football. You haven't been on the board long enough, but you will find out. He's always one of the sports coaches. Anyway, upset, unhappy, concerns, and I said, okay, have you taken this to the principal? No, I haven't, okay, because they were coming to our board meeting with the parents.
Yeah.
I said, let's start, that's not really a board meeting conversation, let's take it to the principal, okay. Hung up, and then at the same time, unbeknownst to me, another board member, also angry parent, unhappy with the principal, she said, come to a board meeting, bring all the parents that are concerned, bring it to the board meeting. Mine got resolved, and actually to the parents' satisfaction, it got dealt with, and they were happy with the teacher, coach not so much, but they got resolved quietly, never, took 6 months to take, we got into it with the union, we got into all sorts of months of trying to undo this work, so it saves you time, it builds trust in the community, and it allows you then to do the work that you want to do. And that's going to take trust and an understanding of how the system works, and then responsiveness on your part of like, yeah, teacher didn't handle that well, here's how we are responding as a district. This is what the principal's doing, here's the training or X, Y, Z that is happening next, so that this gets taken care of. And you keep your board members in the loop. One of the practices we have is every week, superintendent meets with the board member, or the board president, but then every other week we call 2x2, meets with two, we do that here. And that is an excellent time for you to come in and say, like I just happened today, the other board member said, yeah, I hate to do this, but I've heard this concern, and okay. And then you can share all those great things. Okay, here's how this can go. Does that sound like a good starting place to move forward? Is that resonating? I see some head nodding. I see some.
I feel like our 2x2 is very agenda-driven, not concern-driven. So like, I would love to see that part added
Yeah.
to the 2x2, because it feels like we just discussed the agenda. So yes, and I would love to add that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, then it is important to make sure that there's space for the board, you know. In fact, that's how our super always start. What do you have for me? And it starts with the board members' concerns, and then she's got a little checklist of, okay, you know,
Right.
here's what I need to keep you informed of.
Learning something new, that's good.
I think one thing though, Sandy, that you haven't touched upon is nationally, you know, there's some really critical pieces that boards are facing that they never have faced too. And that's a real challenge too.
Partly because I just have to believe that I am sorry, move off of school boards and not just something else inside. Yes, you're right, that is, and I remind individuals when they contact me, when I was board president, I have to update my bio, the ones I would say. If I saw in the room that there were people that hadn't previously worked, because you've got your regulars that they contact, right? But if I saw there was a group that hadn't been to a board meeting, after I do the introduction to public comment, I'm putting my own words. Okay, just a reminder, and I kind of get a sense of why they're there. What brings you here tonight? I don't know, we're unhappy with X. Okay, And so then I'll say on the dais, just to remind you in the room, we want to hear from you. We're so glad you're here tonight. But I believe there might be some things brought up during public comment that are not on the agenda. And we are not allowed by law to address items that were not previously published on the agenda. So we thank you, and we'll talk about how you will get a response, but it's gonna be awkward, and I kind of do that. It's gonna be awkward, you're just gonna talk, we're not gonna respond. We will get back to you, but we can't do it because maybe there was somebody that had a different opinion that didn't know that it was being discussed tonight. So we're not gonna be able to do that. But thank you for being here, and so just be prepared, it's gonna be a little awkward, and we will discuss it. And then if it's a particularly long, drawn out, public comment event, when we get to the end of it, I would say, again, thank you so much for coming. Just a reminder, some of the issues that were brought up, we won't be able to address tonight. So we won't be offended if you would like to go home at this point, right? And then usually everybody packs their bags and out the door. And then that kind of helps keep things moving along. Yeah. I know. It's been a fun couple of years. I think we're gonna. And I'll just editorialize, and I know we're way past time, so I want to be respectful. Because we have this question in front of that, modeling that respect and civility brings the community along. We had an issue years ago in our board where we had a board member that did not display that on the dais. They were combative, they were about themselves. And when they stepped down, there were several of us that said, okay, because the community then responded in kind. That was the behavior they saw from the board, and therefore that was how they were supposed to behave. And we said, we don't believe that has to be the norm. And so we were struggling because we couldn't get board members to agree to sign like a civility policy. The First Amendment was being infringed, but okay, fine. So we just modeled it. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for yelling at us. Thank you so much. We're so glad you're here tonight. And then they would get a written response. One of the various ways that we would tell them how, either from the board president or staff member or whatever. And we were just relentless with, I'm so glad you were here.
Yeah.
Thank you for your bringing this to our attention. We are so sorry that happened. And we did that for the last 2 years. We weren't immune to some of the behaviors, but it has stopped. And we think that's because we just kept saying, thank you for being here. We hear your concerns. Mask policy isn't decided at the board level. All right. We just scratched the surface. So just so you know, I have shared with Leslie that I'm happy to come back if you wanted to, but it sounds like you've got some stuff to start with. Around communication and work with your community and
We really appreciate you coming and fitting us in, because several WASDA people couldn't come for months, even though we asked long before, but we appreciate it. And I think it's valuable, your experience. You know, you've been at this for a while. So.
I grew up in Federal Way, so I remember Kent at least.
Kent, yeah.
Yeah, and experienced that same transition.
Yeah. So it is 7:51, and I think we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.